Evening, everybody. So, a couple quick things, some of which have just occurred to me. First thing, I think, based on this morning, Dad is more excited about this being a series than I am, because I had no plans to make it a series until I talked to him halfway through the week, and he goes, Trees Part 2. And I was like, okay, Trees Part 2. Secondly, I think there could be 12 or 13 parts to the lesson on trees. It's like every time I step into it, I'm overwhelmed with how prominent of a theme it is from Genesis to Revelation, and then practically, like we're hopefully going to be able to talk about as well. Third thing, and this might be the most important thing that I've realized, have a little grace with me, because 8 minutes ago, I realized that my notes didn't sync. So I had notes on my computer that I worked on, and they did not show up on my iPad. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I pretty much know what we're talking about, right? But if I'm a little unpolished, not that that would be weird, but if I am a little unpolished, please bear with me. Give me a little grace for that. So trees are a cool thing. I also this week, I was talking to Joshua and Jana, and they both made fun of me because I said I didn't know how to connect a lesson on trees to Christmas or New Year's. And they were like, was that a joke? Was it supposed to be a joke? Christmas trees. Like, how'd you miss that? And in truth, I did. I just missed it. I just didn't think about it at all. I don't know how Christmas trees connect to the biblical theme of trees either. So just not able to make that connection, but apparently it was right there waiting on me. As we think about this new year and this idea of, I guess like we said last time, being trees, really what we talked about last time was pretty simple. I kind of wrapped up the lesson and even said, this whole lesson was just a lesson about act like Jesus, the end, right? Be a Christian. It was just packaged in this idea of trees, which in my mind, pun intended, rooted it deeply in the Bible. And so what we really did last time was just emphasize, the first half of the lesson was this idea that the Bible sees an intimate connection between the way humans are depicted and the way that trees are depicted. Humans and trees, they're one and the same. They function the same. Humans are trees, metaphorically. And so we talked about that from Genesis chapter 1. We talked about it from Genesis chapter 2. We talked about it from the idea and the language that's used all throughout the Bible to refer to both humans and trees. And then we talked about how this is really obvious with the prophecies about Jesus. All over the place, it's talking about how this root or this branch or this shoot is going to come. And in Zechariah, he's just named the branch. The branch is coming, which is the same thing as saying the Messiah is coming, which is the same thing as saying Jesus is coming, because Jesus was a tree. And then we talked about how Jesus lived his life out, and he was a vessel for the life force of God to flow through and out to the rest of the world. And there's a ton more about Jesus and trees and the cross and a seed and dying and all of that imagery that I think is really potent. But that's not the direction we're going tonight. We basically just emphasized at the end that we need to be like Jesus, the way that Jesus was a tree planted by streams of living water. We need to be so rooted in God that his life-giving force is able to flow into us and out of us and give life to the people that we come into contact with every day. So, with all of that from last time, let's talk about trees. Trees are incredible. I don't know if you've ever sat down and tried to make a list of how many things you can do with a tree or how many things we have as a direct result of trees. But it becomes a very big list very quickly. You don't actually have to think too terribly hard to just immediately have a full-blown list. Like not just a 1, 2, 3 list, but like a 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 list of things that trees do for us. Obviously, like the first one that you should think of is like trees make you breathe, right? They're constantly taking in CO2 and putting out oxygen. They are making it possible for the air that is around us to sustain our life. Just by being themselves, right? Just by being trees. They also, if you then chop down parts of or the whole of a tree, they produce heat. They keep people warm in the winter. They keep people warm in the summer, I suppose. They keep people fed, right? Because the heat can be used to fuel a fire that cooks things or boils water. It can even purify not just the air, but the food and the water that you are consuming as well. Trees, they are also able to be, when they're cut down, turned into all sorts of different things, one of which is what we're doing and where we are right now. I heard someone describe it as we're living within their bones, which was morbid and creepy, but true, right? Like we got tree bones all around us, tree corpse all around us. There's wood in the building and like on the floor and this isn't even a concrete slab foundation building. This is a pier and beam. So we're literally walking on just wood all over the place. When it's chopped down, it gives shelter to people. When trees are upright and standing, they are beautiful. And it cannot be understated, the impact and the importance that beauty has in the world. God, I heard recently there's a guy that I enjoy listening to. He is, I suppose, an agnostic, possibly an atheist, more of a philosopher kind of guy. And one of the things that he said is recently the argument has shifted from logic and the logical argument for God to the existence of beauty and why else is it here. Like God gave us beauty, and if you go even all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, when God describes the trees, like we looked at last time, he says that these trees are going to be for fruit and for beauty, that there is something about trees that is meant to be beautiful, and that is enough. If the tree is just good looking and pleasant and beautiful, that's a reason enough to have trees. Also, when a tree is standing, it provides shade, which, with the modern invention of air conditioning, which I am not in any way complaining about. It's my favorite thing. We don't really think about shade trees as being that luxurious anymore, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, I could sit outside in 110-degree weather in the sun or in the 103-degree weather in the shade, or just go inside. Like, that's how our brain works. But just imagine if your only escape was those 10-degree difference in the shade of a tree rather than being baked in the blistering hot sun of Texas. It's an enormous blessing to have shade from trees. And, I mean, that's something that they give us. I am obviously not going to go through the entire list, but just think of all the things that trees give to us. Shade. I didn't even mention the fruit that trees drop. They grow fruit that can quite literally sustain our lives, fill our stomachs, and just be completely enjoyable. Courtney, well, this for another time, but I got her a press juicer, a cast iron juicer, and we've been having juicing parties with the fruit of trees, and it's delicious and beautiful and all the things. So trees, they're these remarkable things that just give constantly. There's even a book about it. Have you read this? The Giving Tree, exactly. You can take a tree, chop it down, turn it into a house, turn it into a boat, turn it into a business, for crying out loud. This is what trees do, is they just are so incredibly useful. And like when we think about it, they give to us constantly. Another thing about trees is they're not just giving, but they are incredibly renewable. We make a big deal nowadays about where our energy is coming from, and is our energy renewable? And when you sign up for an electricity plan, they tell you what percentage of your electricity is going to be from renewable resources. And when they're talking about that, they're usually talking about like wind and solar. But the original renewable resource was trees, right? Because they're everywhere, and if you don't take the whole tree down and you just use the branches. I remember when I was in Kenya, that's funny, we were talking about that this morning, and when I was in Kenya, what they would do is they would have some of the men or the boys would climb up these trees just as high as they would go and pull off the leaves and the branches. Well, they didn't want to take the whole tree down because they needed the tree for shade and for air, oxygen, and they needed it to be there. So what they would do is they would just tear off some branches as they needed them for their fires or for their work, and then they'd go get more, because trees have this affinity for growing branches. And so they're renewable in and of themselves. They continue to grow and continue to generate. But not just that, they also frequently drop seed everywhere. You guys know the battle if you have a tree in your front lawn that drops acorns. Ours drops acorns. And sometimes when a car is parked outside of our house, it sounds like a gunshot because the acorns will hit the top of the metal car. One time there were some police officers on our street, and they were talking to some of our neighbors. And in the middle of it, an acorn dropped on my car, and he jumped around and grabbed and I said, "It's an acorn. It's just an acorn." And he was at ease very quickly. But I mean, really, like, we can't back out of our driveway without sounding like a tire is popping. Like, when trees drop their seed, it's everywhere. It's all over the place. And just a fraction of those seeds, but plenty, will sprout, root, and turn into a new tree. They also bear fruit, like we said, and inside of that fruit are other seeds that are able to be cultivated and make more trees. They're renewable. Third thing, and this might be the coolest thing, okay? This might be the coolest thing. I was talking to a friend of mine named Boo, and, well, his name is Andrew, but he looks like Abu the monkey. Some of you guys know Boo Scott. And he said that he read this book about trees recently, and it's called, if you want to read it, it's called The Secret Life of Trees, okay? The Secret Life of Trees. And this guy, it is not a religious book at all. It's a book about botany. It's a book about trees, okay? And this guy went out and he studies forests and, like, wooded areas. Apparently, trees live in communities. Like, you've probably heard of the big aspen groves where they're like it's a one ecosystem with many different trees and all their roots are intertwined underneath. Not like that. Like, individual trees of varying species will actually live in community with each other. They have the ability to communicate with each other. What's really interesting is in this very non-religious book, it describes the closest thing that they can call the trees doing is groaning or grumbling. Anyone else hear Romans 8 and the creation is groaning? Okay, so it's really interesting that this guy who has no agenda says that trees have this ability to communicate with each other, but the closest thing that we could describe, it's not language, it's just it's like they're groaning, like they're grunting towards each other. Fascinating. Anyway, so they communicate in all sorts of different ways. Trees in like Africa, when giraffes would eat the leaves of a tree, giraffe goes and he's grazing on a tree. The tree will immediately secrete a smell or a texture on the leaves that will cause the giraffe to be sick. And so as the giraffe starts to eat, trees at their own pace, which is a very slow pace, will secrete this smell or this chemical. The giraffe will then go away from the tree, right? And where would you expect a giraffe to go? To the next tree, right? But consistently, as they've watched, as this guy who wrote this book watched, the giraffe will go about 100 yards away to the tree that's about 100 yards away every time. Not to the one right next to it, but much further. And they couldn't figure this out. Like, why is this happening? Well, it happens because when the tree secretes that chemical, it also, in the air, sends out another chemical that warns other trees that giraffes are grazing, and that chemical dissipates at about 100 yards. But every tree that a giraffe chomps on tells all the other trees around it, hey, giraffes are eating, and those other trees within 100 yards will all also secrete that same chemical, which is fascinating. It's fascinating. It's like the trees are crying wolf, giraffe, and all the other trees around it within about 100 yards can hear or smell what they're saying. Then they also have the ability to communicate. There are electronic pulses moving very slowly through their roots. Trees are able to communicate in that way with each other through their root system. They're also able to share resources with each other. I thought this was really interesting. In the book, the guy talks about how one time he came upon a stump in the woods, and based on whatever he has knowledge of that I don't, he aged this stump to be about 20 years old. And he was like, that's bizarre. I don't know if you guys have had a stump in your yard, but it doesn't last 20 years. Usually it dies out in just a couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years, and that stump will be easy enough to you can just push it over practically because it's dead. And so he found this stump that was like 20 years old, and what he realized as he dug around and figured it out is that the trees around this stump had force-fed that stump their nutrients to keep it alive for 20 years. Somehow this tree had fallen down in the woods, lightning or an animal, and the trees around it all shared nutrients and resources and kept that stump alive. So trees are able to communicate with each other, able to live in community, to share resources, and to live at their own very slow, beautiful pace. That's a lot of stuff about trees, all right? That's a lot. But some of you, because we've already set the foundation that people are trees, are probably making some of these connections. The first thing we have to ask is, if people are trees, what does that look like day to day, right? The Bible, I think we talked about it last time, clearly points out that people and trees are connected. That when you look at the way a tree lives its life, you should see something about the way a human should live their life. And so that's what we're going to do tonight. The first thing, just like trees are remarkably giving creatures. Can you call a tree a creature? I don't know. My whole paradigm is broken now that people are trees. But just like trees are remarkably giving creatures, humans, in specifically Christians, Jesus-following humans, ought to be the same kind of giving people. When I first thought about this, actually, I thought, well, trees give physical life, right? Trees sustain people's bodies, and so then spiritually, Christians should sustain other people spiritually. And then I just kept thinking about how many times, no, actually, Christians are supposed to sustain people's physical lives too. Matthew 25, you probably already flipped over there without me saying a word. Matthew chapter 25. In verse 31, let's go. We're familiar with the scene, so let's jump in at verse 34. Jesus is going to separate the sheep from the goats, and then in verse 34, the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are prepared, who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." Okay. Not spiritually, right? Like Jesus doesn't say, you spiritually fed people, right? Well, you spiritually clothed people. Like he seems to be pretty straightforward in what he's saying here. And if people are trees, and if we can take our cues, if we can learn about this life that we're meant to live from the trees, I think we got to start here. Trees feed people. Christians should feed people. We've talked about this a number of times, and this is where citations are really helpful, but I'll just reference them for tonight. All through the Gospels, Jesus is eating with and feeding people. The 5,000, the 4,000, the entire Gospel of Luke is structured with meals that Jesus is eating with people. Christians, followers of Jesus, should be feeding hungry people. Full stop. Just like trees, we should take care of people who are hungry. Jesus, in fact, seems to imply our judgment depends on it. Secondly, trees, when they're cut down or when they're standing, they give some kind of shelter to people. They take people in and protect them. There are people in the world who are constantly being taken advantage of. Believe it or not, children, number one demographic. Old people, very old people, seniors, no one here, of course. Very old people are the second demographic of being abused. And what I mean is online fraud scams, nursing home sexual assaults, like all kinds of stuff happens to people that you would never think is happening. But it is. There are people in the world constantly who are in desperate need of protection. The young and the old especially. In the New Testament and the Old Testament, the people who were most vulnerable were described as the orphans and the widows, because culturally those were the people who needed someone to step in for them and take care of them and help them in their society. Well, our society, yeah, sure, orphans, definitely, widows, for sure, but there's more. Like there are needs everywhere. People needing someone to advocate for them and to protect them from others who are trying to do them harm. Trees protect people, they shelter people, and I think we also need to shelter and protect people. Matthew 25 talks about clothing. Jesus talks about, I was naked and you clothed me. Trees. One time I saw a commercial for Allbirds runners made out of trees. They were like Australian or something, so they called sneakers runners, which is of course, that's a great name for them. Why don't we call running shoes runners? Anyway, they said you can make shoes out of trees. Okay, well, I have clothes for my children that are made out of bamboo, which is kind of like a tree. Listen, trees clothe people, all right? That wasn't on our list, but it is objectively a true thing. In fact, the first clothing ever put on by humans was made out of trees in the garden. Fun fact. I don't know how it relates, but it might just relate. Listen, this is something that trees do. It's something that people should do. It's something that Jesus says we should do. Not metaphorically. We're not just trying to clothe people in Christ. Of course we are. But literally, we should be taking care of people who don't have enough. Just a couple weeks ago, I don't know, Christmas was really long. It might have been months ago. We did a coat drive for a church up in Oklahoma that literally people needed some clothes. Matthew 25, we just did what Jesus said, and we are acting and living like trees. I also think about relationship. Jesus, in this passage, doesn't say that I was sick and you healed me, or I was in prison and you liberated me, but he just says I was sick and in prison and you visited me, you came to me. Okay, the giving tree might be the most beautiful illustration of this, but the tree in that book, if you haven't read it, just get a box of tissues and go read the children's book. The tree in that book is just giving of itself constantly because it loves the boy in the book. You need apples? Take all my apples. You need branches? Take all my branches. You need wood? Chop me down. You need a place to sit? Just sit with me. I mean, this is what we ought to look like for people who are in need of relationship. Listen, you need someone to sit with you in the hospital? Of course. You need someone to call you because it's an anniversary? Of course. I heard about an organization recently that they lost. It was started by this couple who lost their daughter in a tornado. It was a natural disaster, and it was just completely, tornadoes are one of the most unexpected natural disasters. They just pop up, and there's very little time to get out. And so they had lost a daughter. And what they realized was that moment and the funeral and that whole process was really, really difficult. But then so was that same day next year. And so was what would have been her 16th birthday. And so was what would have been her high school graduation. And that hurt and that loss didn't go away in a moment. And so they actually founded a organization that does that for people who have experienced loss. They have volunteers who build relationships with people who have experienced loss, and they make sure to call them on anniversaries. They make sure to write them on difficult days. They make sure to check in on them when things are maybe at their darkest. Listen, trees are pretty sturdy, all right? They're always there. I think if humans are trees, if we're going to do what Jesus says in Matthew 25, then we need to be able to give people relationship, give people love when they're hurting, just like he says here in Matthew 25. Another thing we said that trees do is they give us beauty and art. I couldn't help but think of the passage in 2 Timothy where Paul is talking about how some vessels are built for honorable use and some for dishonorable use, which is a weird Bible-y way of saying some things are pretty and some things are practical. There are some trees that are just beautiful and lovely and some that are just really useful and necessary. And I think as Christians, there's got to be a place for that too. In fact, in church history, most of the great artists of history were Christians. They didn't preach sermons. They painted paintings, or they painted buildings in some cases. There's always been a value and an appreciation for art in the Christian faith. And I think that points us, I think this idea of people being trees points us to that being a really good thing. There are some people that God put on this earth to be pretty. I don't mean like to look pretty, although Joseph was extremely handsome. It's in the Bible. What I mean is there are some people who are here to bring beauty into the world, and that is a good thing. There are even trees made for that same express purpose. Romans 9 also, Paul talks about this idea of vessels for honorable and dishonorable use. We talked about that a little bit. Again, transition, it's gone, I don't know. I have the word reliable written down. Kind of talked about that, but there are two other parts of that I wanted to hit on. Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount about being a peacemaker. The blessed are the peacemakers, right? This is this idea that someone comes into a place and brings with them peace. Well, trees are extremely reliable. I don't know if they make peace, but they are sturdy. They are stable. They're not something that is one way one day and a different way the next. I think there's a lot of peacemaking that relates between those two. And then Philippians chapter 4 and verse 5, Paul says to let your reasonableness be known to all people. This idea of reason, these are kind of abstract, and I had a better way to sort of flesh these out. But the idea of being reasonable to me paints a picture of someone that is sturdy. You can bring a problem to them, and they're not going to give you an answer based on how they're feeling in the moment. They're not overwhelmed by a catastrophic story. They're able to see through some of the waves and the wind and just be reasonable. Like if you know a person like that in your life, they're an extremely valuable person. Usually, it's mom or dad. And it's the first time you encounter a crisis as a kid. Dad, what? Like, my taxes are due. What do I do? Listen, son, you can file an extension. That may or may not be a real conversation that happened. Listen, let your reasonableness be known to all people. Be sturdy. Be someone like a tree who is planted, rooted. They're not tossed to and fro by the wind, but they are someone who is solid and reliable. So giving, trees are incredibly giving. Christians should be giving both all the actual things, physical things that people need, also the relationship, also the artistry that trees bring to the world. Humans should do that as well. Ultimately, trees are giving of themselves to others. Like we said in the first lesson, that trees are rooted in a source of life, and they bring that into themselves, through themselves, and out to the people around them. I think this is something that Christians ought to do as well. We ought to be giving. We ought to be rooted in God so that we can let His Spirit and His life-giving force flow in and through and out of us to the other people around us, ultimately giving of ourselves. I guess a couple quick things. Trees don't give based on people deserving it. Like, they just give everyone oxygen all the time. Trees don't try and make people earn it. They're not trying to withhold their fruit for the people who are worthy. They're giving of their fruit to everyone. Trees don't only shade good people. They shade everybody. Like, there's something about trees that is not, it's not selectively giving. They're not trying to assess morality. Trees just give all the time. Dare I say, it's who they are. If people are trees, I think people, Christians especially, should just give because it is who we are. And then ultimately, this is exactly what Jesus did, this picture of a tree that empties itself. Jesus was the original giving tree. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 7, Jesus emptied himself by taking the form of a servant and being born in the likeness of men. This is what Jesus did. He gave and gave and gave until he was empty. And if we're going to be trees, we need to give of ourselves as well. Just like trees are renewable, this is that second idea that we talked about. Just like trees are renewable, people are able to be renewed. So we talked last time a little bit about the fruit of the Spirit and how Christians are meant to be producing the fruit of the Spirit, and fruit is something that sustains people around you, but also causes growth. Like when fruit falls into the ground, the seed within it falls into the ground and dies. In fact, Jesus even says something to this effect. I had it written down, I promise, at one point, where he says, unless a seed falls into the ground and dies, it cannot produce. Yeah, like Christians are meant to be trees. We're supposed to give of ourselves to even the point of death, because when a seed falls into the ground and dies, it's able to produce much fruit. And when Christians give of themselves, it is able to bring life to those around them, some 10, some 20, some 100-fold. I also was thinking about this idea in Romans chapter 12 of being a living sacrifice, almost like the image of a tree, like in Kenya, where they break off the branches. The tree is constantly sacrificing parts of itself. It's still alive, but it's still giving. I thought that was a beautiful metaphor for the way that Christians are able to be renewed. And community. We talked about trees living in community. This is not a surprising theme if you are familiar with the New Testament, especially in the book of Acts. But there are two different spots, Acts chapter 2 and Acts chapter 5, where it describes how the early Christians engaged with each other. They didn't just hang out with the people that they liked, but there was something unifying about the gospel, that it brought these people together. And in Acts chapter 2, it describes them as laying their belongings at the apostles' feet and giving to everyone as anyone had need. Like that sounds so much like a tree, right? Not just this idea of giving, but this idea of living in community. Like we talked about earlier, the trees are able to sustain the life of other trees around them. Like we have enough to sustain the life of people around us. We just have to give it. We have to choose to live in community the way that the early Christians did and the way that the trees do. Galatians chapter 6 is another spot that I think highlights this truth, the idea of living in community. In Galatians chapter 6, Paul says that if anyone's caught in a temptation or a trespass, those who are spiritual should go restore them. You should be bearing one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. This is what trees do all the time. They do it all the time. They do it in forests. They do it in these aspen groves. Trees are constantly bearing one another's burdens. Another thing that guy said in the book that wasn't about Christians, but was about trees, but was about Christians because Christians are trees, was that trees will actually actively not branch into each other, that they will communicate as they get closer. And if you put two trees right next to each other, they will grow out, but not towards each other past a certain point. They're able to communicate and not overwhelm because they know each other needs sunlight. And so they don't grow over each other more than is able. They'll grow out rather than growing over their neighbor. And so Christians ought to live in community the way that trees do. We ought to bear each other's burdens. We ought to be aware of each other's needs, just like the trees are. We ought to be communicating with each other regularly. We ought to be calling out to each other when giraffes are biting us. That's what I mean. People are trees, and they live in community with one another. Hebrews chapter 10, which is the spot that we always go to for this because it's a beautiful picture. In Hebrews 10 and verse 24, the Hebrew writer, who is not or is maybe Paul, says that we're to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together like some do, but encouraging each other all the more. There is something about the way Christians should live that is not individual, right? It's not by yourself. It's not in isolation. A tree by itself can only do so much, but a tree in community can form a whole forest. They can sustain life much better, and they're able to share their resources like crazy. If Christians are meant to be trees, if people are trees, then the best way to live is to look at a tree. Romans chapter 1, Paul says that God's divine power, or divine nature and eternal power is seen in the creation of the world. In other passages, it talks about how the heavens declare the glory of God. In the Psalms, constantly, nature imagery, trees specifically, are used to say, this is what we should be like. This is a beautiful thing. This is a truth about who God is. God is a rock. Okay, well, we just spend a lot of time talking about trees, and I think we're making the same point tonight. When you look at a tree, you are not just looking at a nuisance. They drop leaves, they drop acorns. You are not just looking at a resource. Yeah, they help us breathe, they build houses. You are looking at a piece of creation from God. Like, that tree was divinely created. And as a result, it, by simply doing what it does, is going to proclaim some things about God and some truths about who God is and what he wants. In this case, as we've looked at tonight, all you have to do is look at how a tree functions, and you will be able to see what God wants you to do in your life. He wants you to be giving by nature, giving of yourself, self-sacrificial. He wants you to be renewable. He wants you to live in community. Now, I could have just said tonight, hey, go to church and love people. Give to the poor. And that would have essentially communicated the same lesson. But how much more powerful is it to know that that same message has been communicated from God since the foundation of the world? He made trees for you to look at. He made trees for us to learn from. So, 2026, we got a bunch of trees. If we can be like trees, then we can, like we said last lesson, take the life-giving force of God into ourself, be rooted in God, let that force pass through us and produce life to those who are around us. So let's be trees in 2026. If you need to become a Christian or if you need prayer of the church, let us know what you need while we stand and sing.